Hello, today we're going to do something different because honestly when this video comes out, I'll be about a week out from my birthday, and while I definitely love watching Japanese horror to the degree that I'm hoping to do it more going forward, I also have movies that I love even more that aren't in that genre, and I kind of want to look into those every now and then too, so as not to break branding, you know? And this is one of those times. Okay, so you see the title, you know what this is. We're looking at 1408, an adaptation of the Stephen King short story of the same name. And I'm going to be straight with you. I've read 1408, and while I do think that the story would actually do wonderfully as a direct adaptation, this movie is not that. Though it does keep some of the scares and changes a few of the others, which I'll try to point out as we go along. Second disclaimer, this movie has two different endings, the theatrical one and a, DVD director's cut ending, and some cutscenes that were put back for the DVD release, I believe. There's some debate about which is better. I've chosen the version with my preferred ending, and we'll go over it when I get there. Okay, all of that out of the way. Let's go over the spoiler-free look. 1408 is a movie about Mike Enslin, a writer who's been succeeding on the back of sensationalist supernatural travel guides like 10 Haunted Graveyards and 10 Haunted Castles, and really seems to dislike the fact that that's who he is. When he receives a warning not to stay in room 1408 of the Dolphin Hotel in New York City, though, he can't refuse the invitation, and that's really all I could say without getting into any detail about the events. The majority of this movie does take place in room 1408, as the name would imply, and it's kind of a constant barrage of events happening. So really that's all the preface I can give you without getting into story spoilers. What I can say though is this movie is a masterpiece of atmosphere and performance. While there are several supporting characters like Tony Shalhoub as his editor / publisher and Samuel L. Jackson as the hotel's manager, once Mike gets into the room proper, so much of this movie relies entirely on John Cusack to sell it. Much like Ryan Reynolds in Buried or Colin Farrell in Phone Booth, John Cusack spends a majority of this film alone interacting with images and sounds or lack thereof, and has to effectively sell the trauma of the adventure with 1408, which I at least think he does wonderfully. That's not to take away from the characters working together though. Cusack and Jackson have two prolonged conversations in this film, both of which are some of my favorite scenes in the movie, and the moments involving his daughter Katie are honestly emotional gut punches. I cannot recommend this movie enough to anyone and everyone who loves horror films of the non-slasher variety. Alright, so that's the non-spoiler sales pitch for the movie. Hopefully I've motivated some people to check it out, as it's fully available on YouTube. Not gonna link so it doesn't get taken down, but trust me, it's there, you can find it. Alright, I'm just gonna gush about this movie for the rest of the video, so I'm just gonna get right into it. We start the film by joining Mike on his trip to investigate a hotel that he seems to have trouble finding. Once he does though, we immediately get a taste of who he is and what he seems to deal with as part of his job. He arrives tired and eager to get into the room and relax after the trip, but finds himself interrupted and harangued by the eager owners of the hotel, who want to fully inform him of the hotel's haunted history. Their words, not mine. While he's not outright rude about it, there's a bored dismissal of their story and a kind of heard it before expression as they talk. The next day, he heads to a bookstore for a signing and Q&A, and continues his dismissal of the supernatural by saying that he's been to places that he would describe as intense or heavy, but he's never seen a real ghost or experienced anything remotely paranormal. But he has noticed that it's always hotels that need business after the interstate moves away that become haunted. He does offer the helpful suggestion of visiting the Haunted Mansion in Orlando, Florida, if you want a guaranteed ghost sighting, so there's that. He continues to be unable to catch a break when he decides to go surfing to clear his head. As he takes a moment to take in a banner plane flying overhead, he finds himself taken down by a rogue wave before washing up on shore. After that break, he goes through his P.O. box full of brochures and letters for haunted hotels before stumbling upon a postcard telling him not to stay in room 1408. And while this does get his attention, his interest is piqued when he calls to reserve the room and they tell him that it's unavailable, no matter how far in advance he asks. He begins to research the room, finding a bloody history of murder and suicide, while his editor Sam, played by Tony Shalhoub, hires a lawyer to invoke a civil rights clause to force the dolphin to give Mike the rooms before having a private conversation implying that Mike has a poor history with New York City. Mike does make his way to the dolphin, though, to check in, where he's asked for a private meeting with the manager, Mr. Olin, played by Samuel L. Jackson, in an attempt to discourage him from staying in the room. I wish that I could play this entire scene for you with audio, and maybe I could, but I'm not going to risk it, because the back and forth between these two is wonderful. Anyone who's seen Grosse Pointe Blank will tell you that John Cusack is more than talented as a speaker, and anyone that's seen Pulp Fiction will tell you that Samuel L. Jackson is just as good, if not more memorable, for his speaking parts, and that shines in this scene. The forced cordiality of Olin as he tries to maintain professionalism, while Mike clearly feels in complete control of the situation since he knows that all he has to do is refuse anything but the room. The two go over the grisly deaths of room 1408, where Mike finally gets knocked off balance by the sheer number of deaths and the methods of those deaths that weren't publicized. He does regain his composure and control by saying that he's still staying after being criticized by Olin for being a bargain shelf writer who doesn't believe in anything or anyone but himself. Olin reluctantly gives Mike the key to the room, an actual metal key, informing him that electronics don't seem to work in room 1408. When Mike tries to attribute this to ghost inspectors, Olin corrects him by saying that there's no such thing in there. It's just an evil fucking room. The issues seem to begin in the hallway leading to the room, as Mike becomes so engrossed with the records and pictures of the events of the room that he seems to circle back around to the elevator, which opens in front of him, as though offering him one last escape. He refuses and makes his way to 1408 and opens the door. He takes a long, slow look around the room and finds himself greatly underwhelmed. Part of which he attributes to Mr. Olin for his sales pitch and aggressiveness in selling the terror before commenting that it's just a room. He spent some time going around the room, examining the amenities and the decor, breaking down and critiquing everything in the room into his tape recorder, until the radio blares on, giving him his first surprise of the night as he notices that his hotel room has been completely reset with a full turndown service. As Mike tries to figure out who and how they could have done this while he was in the room, he comes to the conclusion that they must have gotten out through the vent and notices that the thermostat is broken. Surprisingly, they agree to send a maintenance man up when he calls, and he takes a quiet moment to reflect on the inherent creepiness of hotel rooms before he begins his investigation proper, running a black light over the room, which seems to still be covered in the blood of past victims, even if the surface has been cleaned. He then notices that the painting of a boat at sea is tilted to the side, which he straightens, then tilts to the opposite side. I think this is a reference to the original short story, as when Mike approaches 1408 in the book, it's a novella in a book, the door is visibly leaning, if I remember correctly, to the left, then it's back straight up, and then leans to the right, which is the same thing that Mike kind of did with his frame. His DIY renovation, though, is interrupted by the maintenance man, who does refuse to enter the room itself, but tells Mike how to fix the thermostat before immediately booking it away at his first opportunity. As Mike settles in, the radio blares to life again, drawing his attention before setting itself for a 60-minute countdown, harkening back to Olin's claim that nobody has ever lasted in this room more than an hour. Mike, and we, then lose all ambient sound, causing Mike to lean out the window, listening to the silent city streets, until the window frame slams down on his hand, and then when he tries to clean it, the sink erupts in steaming hot water, prompting Mike to call it quits and try to check out, but finds the front desk clerk nonsensical and completely unhelpful until they just straight hang up on him. When he tries to leave the room himself, he finds the door locked, and then breaks the key trying to unlock it, with the broken half disappearing into the keyhole. He then picks the lock with a dinner knife before the doorknob falls off. When he tries to look through the peephole to see outside, he sees only another eye staring back at him. He then tries to yell out into the city for help, drawing the attention of someone in an apartment across the street. As he yells and gestures to the figure, he notices that he isn't responding to him. It's copying him. He reaches for a nearby lamp to reveal that it is in fact him in the apartment. Before he can make sense of what's happening, his doppelganger is murdered by someone as he turns around in the hotel to see the exact same person in his room. He recoils, but the person disappears before it can harm him. Mike retreats into the recorder for help, determining that Olin must have drugged him when he gave him the alcohol, and that he needs to just make it through this trip. This thought is interrupted, however, when the TV plays a home video from the Enslin household of him, his wife, and his daughter making scary faces at each other. Mike then begins to see faded copies, like shadows of previous victims. For YouTube purposes, let's say falling victim to the room. When a baby starts crying in the room next door, he realizes that he can reach out to the others around him. As he tries to get the attention of those people through the wall though, the baby's cry grows louder and louder with each bang, knocking Mike to the floor in pain until he grabs a chair and throws it at the wall. The horrors continue as in the bathroom, Mike finds an old man sitting in a wheelchair that is eventually revealed to be his father, who simply warns him that as you are, I was, and as I am, you will be. Which might be a reference to aging or death, as when Mike was entering the room, his dad mutters, I was dead. The Dempsey role of mental assault continues though, as the wall that Mike threw the chair at seems to start bleeding, and every time Mike approaches it, it gushes with an audible cracking sound and more fluid coming out. Mike decides to try to escape by walking over to the window of the room next door. He prefaces his excursion by recording that should he slip and fall, it was an accident. The room did not win. He notices too late though that there are no other windows on the wall and must make his way back to 1408, where he's again attacked by the shade of a previous victim, as she performs the worst swan dive I've ever seen. Mike manages to dive back into the room before the window shuts and notices that 14 seems to be the only room at all, the peephole revealing that there's only solid wall outside, and that the window in the bedroom is now gone. Listening back over the recording, he himself confirms that there is no window in the bedroom, and the knowledge that even his own thoughts and recordings can be altered seems to push Mike over the edge as he observes a memory of him and his wife finding out that their daughter is terminally ill. This does give Mike an idea though, as he remembers his bags. The first thing he does is check his phone, which obviously has no signal, but then his computer that does have internet connection, and he manages to call his ex-wife, who seems both upset that he's in New York City and that he hasn't spoken to her since he left some time ago, leaving their relationship unclear. The speakers go off, killing his computer, but drawing Mike's attention to the vents, which he then tries to escape through. He approaches another vent where he finds a memory of himself leaving his wife and crying newborn baby, then another where his dad confronts him about leaving Lily after the death of their child, and he tries to make his way to a third one before coming across the dried out husk of a body begging him for help, forcing Mike to retreat back to 1408. When he goes for another drink, he instead finds Mr. Olin, who confronts him about his cynicism and refusal to believe in life after death and how it has damaged others around him, which causes Mike to just flip out on the snack bar. I love this scene, honestly, if mostly for the freak out. When he turns to the Bible for help, he instead sees a memory of some of his final moments with his daughter and wife as they comfort her with the promise of God and heaven, and then the eventual fallout after she's passed, where he seemingly stops believing in both of those things before walking out. He tries to compose himself before finding the room has become a frozen tundra. The thermostat reads below 0, and he begins taking to burning whatever he can for warmth and monologuing about the circles of hell, including 9 being the frozen one, as well as passing comments about the 6th and 5th, stating simply, "This is 6," or "This is 5," which will come up later. Lily manages to snap him out of it from his computer, where the room takes over his computer to tell her to come to the Dolphin and enter 1408 without telling anyone, before signing off with a small wink to Mike. The room seems to begin to fall apart at the seams, with the paintings becoming dark and macabre versions of themselves. The painting of the boat sailing specifically becomes stormy and brings out with the yells of the damned and the dying until it bursts open, flooding the room, and Mike sinks below. Mike wakes up on the beach. He had passed out as his board hit him in the head while he was surfing. He asks if he's finally out before recounting the adventure to Lily, who tells him that the dolphin doesn't exist. He does seem to be inspired by the dream to fix his life. He begins to repair his relationship with his wife, starts writing a new book about his time in 1408, and when he visits his P.O. box, he doesn't find anything relating to the room or the dolphin. He even visits his father, who it turns out is in a nursing home and seems to suffer from some kind of mental degradation, so I guess that's what that was about. When he goes to mail his new book, though, he finds the post office entirely staffed by workers from the Dolphin, who literally tear apart reality to reveal a thoroughly derelict and seemingly destroyed 1408. As one final push towards the ledge, the room then seems to bring back his daughter Katie, which he tries to refuse initially but can't help but believe. As he embraces her, she laments that they won't let her stay, that they'll take her away from him, and he promises that he won't let them, that he'll keep her this time. And if you're not affected by his reaction as he holds her and she goes lifeless in his arms, then I don't know what to tell you. Like, taken from him again and then crumbles to literal ash as he holds her body. Like, the face of pure horrific surprise as it happens is amazing to me. It's one of my favorite things. He proceeds to just wild out on the remains of the room as the clock approaches 0. He's done it. He survived the hour. He made it. He lays on the floor of a completely reset room. The timer clicks back up to 60, and it all begins again. When he asks why the room doesn't just kill him, the room, via the phone, informs him that all guests have free will, but that his options are only to relive this hour again and again, or take advantage of their express checkout system, which, for YouTube reasons, I'm going to hope that the visuals provided make that clear. He refuses to do so, to which they respond by telling him that his wife is going to be their next victim. And then the phone begins to melt, saying, "This is 5, and this is 8, along with some disturbing threats, which actually is another reference to the short story. One of the hallucinations/events that he experiences are, he thinks that he hears horrifying proclamations aimed at him, some of which include, "This is 5, all of your friends are dead, this is 6, and things like that. In the movie, though, this hardens his resolve, determining to do at least one good thing with his life and protect others from his fate by setting the room on fire. He makes a Molotov and sets the room ablaze as he sits and has a cigarette before finishing his review of the hotel, and seems to perish in the blaze, laughing wildly as he warns the room to never kill more than you can eat. In another ending, he's actually rescued from the blaze and writes a short story that inspires this movie, while Lily finds his recorder and learns that everything he experienced in 1408 actually happened. In this, and my preferred ending, he does indeed pass in the fire, and Lily refuses his personal effects, which includes his recorder. But Mr. Olin tries to tell her that he did do a great thing, and that because of his sacrifice, nobody will ever get to stay in 1408 again. As he leaves, Olin listens to the recording and does seem genuinely sorry for the suffering that Mike had to go through, but also happy that Mike's with his daughter again. Speaking of, we cut to 1408 as the camera pans over the scorched remains, and Mike wanders around, looking over the results of his effort, before his daughter calls to him, which he responds to by walking to the burned out door, which we hear open and then close as we fade to black. His spirit does seem to finally be out. I don't know if I did, or even can, get across what it is about this movie that I love. I try to use this time to show off and describe the message and feeling that the visuals try to provide. At the end of the day, this is all just a glorified synopsis that I hope makes you want to watch the movie and catch all the amazing details that I couldn't or wouldn't provide. As I enter my 30s proper and take stock of what has happened over the past year, I'm happy. I moved in with my partner, survived the first part of a pandemic, I got a new job that I enjoy, and gained, well, all of you. Well, at least 90% of you over the last year. 1.4K. Wow. I know that that's not a number that impresses anyone, and it's not like I'm making, YouTube millions or anything, but it's a number that matters to me because for a long time, the number of people who cared about movies that I loved or wanted to talk about was 1, maybe 2. I'm not going to stop making videos anytime soon. I'm trying to adhere to a schedule, and yeah, it hasn't always worked out, and I don't think it ever will, but I'm not going to stop. I don't expect any of my future videos to blow up like Yo did, and in fact, maybe this is where the channel starts to die, but I'll be here, uploading until I can't anymore. So, now more than ever, always remember, whether you like, comment, and subscribe or not, you're still a friend to me. Good night.
I want my drink!